Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm so excited, y'all. I'm gonna try to be good, but I'm a little bit fangirling. Plus, this is an amazing story. I have an amazing author in the book bar this evening. Um, they, I don't know what to say. I'm just like super excited. But anyway, we're going to start by saying I am Midnight Ace, and you're at the book bar, and I am your host today. And joining me today is author Rhonda Mcknight, and we're going to be discussing her latest release, Bitter and Sweet. So we're going to kind of dive in a little bit. But Rhonda, before we dive all into this good stuff, why don't you tell the audience a little bit about yourself, and then and if you could tell us a little bit about Bitter and Sweet. Why
Okay.
Bitter and Sweet?
Okay. So I'm Rhonda Mcknight. I'm the author of 20, I think this is my 27th book. I've my second women's fiction novel. And prior to that, I wrote romance and just sort of switched it up a little bit during the pandemic. Decided that I wanted to write some stories that would leave kind of a little more of a legacy for myself, and came up with the idea for my first women's fiction novel then, and now Bitter and Sweet is the second one. I live in South Carolina. I'm always a Jersey girl, but I lived in Atlanta for 20 years, and I've lived here in South Carolina for 5 years. And solidly writing low country fiction and enjoying writing stories about South Carolina. I have two sons, 18 and 32.
All right.
That's about it about me. As for this story, Bitter and Sweet is the story of estranged sisters who are at a crossroads in their individual lives, and they get to a point where they're called home from the South Carolina upstate to the low country by their grandmother through sort of a cryptic text message, and they come and never expect to find that the solutions to their current problems are in letters that they received from their grandmother that were written by their great-great-grandmother over 100 years ago, as she navigated her life and dealt with a lot of the same issues that they have today.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And I think that with this story, before we dive in, we have a few visitors that's popping in. I want to just say hi to them and welcome them. Hello, Cinquetta, that's my sissy. Hey, what's up? Hey, Cheryl Brooks, thank you for joining us this evening. And hey there, my boo thing, Miss JB Williams. Thank you so much for joining us. At the cuffs, this story has it is let's first talk about your tagline. So your tagline is writing stories that touch the heart.
Right.
And all of them really do touch the heart. But when I tell you this story here, when you read it, it is such a well-written story. But when you get done reading, you're like, it's you're bringing the book to your heart. You don't want it to end, but you're so full once you get to the end of it, because there's so many things that is going on. And it's stuff that we can all relate to, as women, as men, and definitely as family. And if anybody knows me, you know that family, a family dynamic, the more unique, the better, is one of my favorite things. And I think you've done this in here, both in the past time and in the present. But this book, let me just tell you guys some flavors that's flowing through this book. You got you got sister fiction, you have dual timeline, and I want to talk to you about this. You have romance, you have second chances, you have therapy, grief and loss, you have low country setting, you have the gully culture, and you have multi-generational issues that are here. It's one of those things that the more things change, the more they stay the same. And so you kind of have this, you have this family coming full circle. So let's start with the bitter and the sweet, the title. Because I kind of had my own idea, but I want to kind of talk to you a little bit about what was the message you were sending to us with the title.
I felt like the title related to a lot of the themes that you just went over. All of our lives have moments that are bitter and sweet. No one gets out of here alive just having sweet. Life ebbs and flows. We have ups and downs. There are hard times and there are good times. There are periods of peace and periods of disharmony. It's just the periods where you're healthier than you were, maybe 6 months ago. We have life just sort of ebbs and flows. And so, and I think that through those periods where things are more difficult, we learn, and hopefully during periods when things are, super sweet, we praise, we appreciate them. And so I think it's necessary to have tough moments to appreciate the good ones. And so in writing the title, the original title actually of the book was Something of Her Own, which is very, as you having read the book can recognize, that it's very much was a good title for the book. But my publisher made a decision. They wanted to move out of that direction from a marketing standpoint. And so they came back with some titles I wasn't crazy about. And I started thinking, what is this about? Like, what is here? And I thought there's a lot of really hard places, and then there are places where there are celebrations. And I started thinking, I'm a very thematic writer. I like tying in themes and things that sort of, fit together. And I thought, cooking, there's bitter and there's sweet, and very much was able to identify that there was a character that was really dealing with bitterness, and one that was, or maybe even two, or maybe even three, that were really sweet. And and so the title just came together. And so when I submitted it back to my publisher, they loved it, and we were like, this is a go, because it fit in with the restaurant also.
Yeah, I was so happy that that they allowed you to tell the story the way you wanted to tell the story. So let's talk about the low country setting down there. So over the course of time, there are a few authors who have written about this low country. And so it's a special, it gives me the feeling that it's a special place. So in your words, tell me a little bit about this low country setting and why it's so important for you to put it in the book.
I think that I'm gonna start why it's so important. I think that the low country is a beautiful place, just absolutely gorgeous in its, from an ecological standpoint. There is, it sets on the Atlantic Ocean. And so you have water, and you have beautiful trees and marsh, and it has a different, like an earthy smell that, I don't know that there's any place else I've been that has that mix of the marsh and the salt water. So it has a beautiful smell. There is sort of a easy sort of Southern feel to it. But it's also very diverse. You have people from all over the world, in Charleston and in some of the other low country cities. And then you have the Gullah people who a lot of people sort of know about, like they've heard of them and sort of remember like something about this unique group of people down there. But I feel like the reason that the low country is so important to me, and then let me not forget the food.
We're gonna talk about the food.
But the reason I wanted to the reason I felt compelled to set my stories in the low country is there are two reasons for that. One is I've always traveled to South Carolina as a child. I don't know. I'm sure there's somebody else on this line who, if you're from the North, you came south during 4th of July week. Okay, that was like a standard thing. Everybody's traveling for the summer. And so I would come and I would always see this sign around our family land. Both my grandfathers were farmers. And so Black River is a river that runs like real close to our family land. And I always wondered, as a child, where that river went. And I don't recall ever asking anybody, but I always wanted to know. And so when I moved here to South Carolina, I thought, you know what? I want to find out where Black River goes. So I pulled up my navigation, got in the car, and drove the hour and a half down to the very end of the river, because you could basically follow it on the highway. And when it ended in Winya Bay. And
Ooh.
when I in Winya Bay in Georgetown, and when I got out of my car and I went to the edge, the because there's a boardwalk there, and I've had such a spiritual experience standing there. That's the only way I can describe it. I looked across the water, across the ocean. It was the most beautiful blue, clear day ever, and I felt like I could see the motherland, and
Oh,
I
wow.
felt the presence of enslaved Africans. I felt the presence of my ancestors. And, I knew a lot about the rice farming that had taken
Mhm.
place in the Low Country, because when I moved, I studied the state. My son is a student. And so we started studying South Carolina history because we had moved from Georgia. And, so now we're in a new
Okay.
state, you learn the history. And so I
Mhm.
learned so much about the politics and how difficult rice farming was, and that it was worse than tobacco and cotton. A lot of times people think that cotton was the worst. The days were so long. The
Mhm.
days were shorter with rice. However, they were shorter because they had to be shorter. It was 1,000,000 degrees, and they were in water. They worked in water with snakes and alligators and water moccasins, and there was a very, very high mortality rate. Children died at 10. It
Wow.
was just really, really, really. And when I say that, I mean, and they let them die because they could replace them
Mm.
cheaply, because kids were cheap.
Mhm.
And so when I learned all of that, I thought, gosh, when I look at the New York Times bestseller list, or any bestseller list that includes an author who's writing low country fiction, it was always a white author. And, no criticism to them, but, writing about condos and beaches and turtles. And I'm like, our people built this land. We built this area. We created the wealth that is Charleston and the Low Country. All these condos and all this gorgeous stuff. This was the blood of my ancestors. So I felt compelled to set stories there. I felt like there aren't a lot of people that write books. I mean, there are a few, but there aren't a lot of us that have written stories set in the Low Country. And I was just like, well, it's time for somebody to bust on scene and start doing it too, because this is not just their stories. This is not just their land. And so that's the number one reason that I
Wow.
decided I wanted to set stories in the Low Country.
And you bring up a point. I was talking to I think I was talking to Angela, but I've had this conversation with a few people about, recently, some of our people, some of our authors have been writing a little bit historical things. So my thing is, as a writer, and as long as you have been writing, you able to write this story, this historical sort of story. Was it, is the timing like now? Why now did you write this story? Is it easier for you to write the story, or has it just been the story just didn't come to you?
I think that a couple of things. First of all, historical fiction is extremely intimidating. I mean, I love historical fiction. I read lots of historical fiction. I've always admired people that write historical fiction.
Mm-hmm.
So it was not a thing that I ever wanted to write. I was a contemporary fiction writer. And so I wrote the historical scenes. My first time writing historical was when I wrote the chapters in The Thing About Home. Well, that happened by accident. I sold a contemporary novel to my publisher. There were supposed to be journal entries in that book, and I was writing the journal entries, and they were coming up flat. And so I went to bed, like, sort of frustrated and kind of praying about it, like, what's the, how, Lord, fix it, type of thing.
Yes,
With the
fix
writing.
it.
Yeah, you fix it, okay? Because this whole book was your idea anyway. So, but I woke up at 2 a.m. and I saw this woman, washing blood off her hands in a river. And I went to my laptop and I
Ooh.
just typed what I saw. And so the next day I looked at it and I was like, okay, this is interesting. And then it happened again. And I was like, okay, like, wait a minute though. I don't write historical fiction, you know? And so I was really nervous about it because I respect the people, Miss Bev, you know, Vanessa Riley, you know, like I could go on with the names of people who write historical fiction that do a beautiful job at it. Like, I feel like you just don't jump in somebody's space like, oh, this is easy, I can do it, you know? But I feel like, you know, I had a conversation with Riley just this weekend. She's reading Bitter and Sweet. And she said, your historical voice is so strong. Like, this is the lane. Yes. And so, which was, you know, and Victoria Christopher Murray told me the same thing when she read the thing about home. She said, you know, you're going to write historical now. So I guess it's just, I think it was time. I think that I've maybe matured. I found the right story. If it didn't happen by accident, I don't think it would have happened. I don't think I ever would have sat down and thought, oh, I want to write historical chapters. I want to write a dual timeline. That wouldn't have happened.
Yeah. Now let's talk about the dual timeline, because it's one thing to write historical. It's one thing to write contemporary, but to write a dual timeline together. And oh my gosh, Rhonda, you did this story so I don't know if I can explain it in words, but guys, it's just a really well written story. When you transition just soon enough, you know, just when my heart was getting full with Tabby, and I was like, I don't know if I can keep reading this. You switched over and you gave me some banter between Mariah and Sabrina. And just you took me back. And when I got tired of their madness, I wanted to get some more serious stuff. You took me back to Tabby. I mean, just the transition was just perfect for me. I don't know about anybody else, but it was perfect for me. The transition. So writing a dual timeline is a little bit different.
It is
of a flavor than just writing historical or contemporary. And so tell me, what was it like writing a dual timeline? And this was your first, correct?
This was the second. The thing about Home was about 25% of that book was written during the years 1867 to 1902.
Right,
and so now this book is 50%. So it was a whole lot more.
Right.
It was challenging. I had done it with the thing about Home. You know, and you're an influencer, so you know, like the buzz around that book was really, really strong. I got to go to Essence with it. A lot of people loved it. But when it came time for this book, there was just so much more. Like, I started, and it was Tabitha's chapter. I started with the same goal in mind, that we would have about 25% of Tabitha's story. But Tabitha just kept growing and growing. She said, I got stuff to say. No, this is happening to me. This is happening. And I couldn't stop writing her story. So it became 50%. And so then at that point, it was a little concerning, because you're right. When you write in dual timeline, you have to be really careful about where you intersect the chapters. Like, I wanted to make sure that things that were happening, you know, romantically for Tabitha were intersecting at the same time for at least one of the women in the present. And so doing that, timing that, is not easy. This was a hard book to write. It was, in some respects, it was frustrating, but when it was done, I thought, I think this is good. I think it's okay. And so I got some feedback from two editors that I work with privately, you know, aside from my editor at Thomas Nelson. You know, I you know, I trust the people I've been working with, you know. And so I pulled my two sisters in and asked them to read it and be honest with me, let me know, because you know, I need to make sure that, and my editor at Thomas Nelson was new to me. I had not worked with her before. My editor switched between books because the person who brought me in had a baby. And so I had a brand new editor, and I was like, I don't know her, and my book got to be good. So, you know, I went with some private editors to sort of try to help me to make sure it was right. And they were like, no, girl, this is good. You got it. And, you know, I still struggle with that, you know, because it's like, are y'all sure, you know, because I just really wanted it to be just a gift for Black women. And, you know, if you want to give somebody a gift, you want to give them the best. You know, I'm not a person that wants to give somebody something cheap and half done. I really, really endeavor at this point in my career. And I think I've always been this way. And that's because I've always had really, like, Victoria Christopher Murray is my mentor. You know, you have a
Mhm.
mentor like that. What are you going to do? You got to deliver excellence. You can't call her your mentor and have a half shoddy book.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I've always wanted to just write the best books that I could possibly write, because I feel like we deserve it. I feel like when people give you, I mean, this book is like 18 bucks. Somebody's going to give you $18 for a book. They need to have a good experience with it. So quality has always been my thing, which is why, like I said, you know, I'm willing to bring freelancers in and do whatever I have to do to make sure that it works. So it was not easy though, because Tabitha's story became so big. And then also with dual timeline, what you have to be careful with is you have to make sure that the contemporary, because a lot of times people fall in love with one version of the story. Either they're loving the contemporary and not
Yeah.
crazy about the historical, or the opposite. And I knew that people would lean into Tabitha. So I was like, okay, this story between these two chicks in the content, it's got to be strong. They got to have stuff
Yeah.
going on. And so I really, that's the other challenge with writing in dual timeline, is keeping everything interesting. Everybody having enough, you know. So
Well, you hit the mark on that one, and I'm going to bring up. Let me just first say hello to some people who had come in. We got Renata in the house. We got Ava in the house. Hello, hello. We got Romcom Diva. Hey, what's up? What's up? What's up? We got Ria Alexis. We have Angela from Angela's Literary Cafe. We got Carmen Hayes. We got Miss Prissy Parker. Oh wow, we got Loretta Murray, my book club crew. We got Mariah Marina Cooper in the house as well. So let me just say, oh, and Josie just popped in. Hey ladies, hey, 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 thank you for joining us. So let me stop here too, and let me just inject. So guys, y'all know I love my wine when I am reading. So this one right here, I paired this with and I do, you guys will see that I do Camilla Brave, Camilla's wine with a lot of women, strong women stories, because that's the inspiration behind her wine. She has four different flavors of wine. But this one I paired with Camilla Brave. Camilla Fierce. And let me just tell you a little bit about why. And you'll see when you read the story. If you haven't read it already, you'll see where I'm going. If you've read it, you'll understand. So oh my gosh. Let me just see. Let me here. Where's my let me see. So this wine comes from of course it's a red wine, and it's Pinot Noir, it's a blended wine, it's Zinfandel, it's Village, it's Syrah, and it is a Greenwich. So all of those are just red wines in here. But the in the picture you'll see that the lady there has her hands resting on a wine barrel and a book, right? And is proud because she's holding the book, because knowledge is also the weapon for good. And in the bottom side of the label you see a starfish, which means a little Valentine for me, my ride or die. And so when you see how these sisters in here, after they get over themselves, you'll see that they do come together, and well, at least the older sister does come together, and uh, helps out. You'll see their relationship heal. Um, this wine, she's always inspired about a woman who is doing, like I call Miss Bev's women who dare. So a strong woman looks at a challenge dead in the eye and gives a wink, sums the spirit up. On the label, the sunflower, the halo, symbolizes the vitality and the happiness. In her hair is an orange rose, and it represents the enthusiasm and yeah, I actually put hang on here, guys, because I actually covered it up. um Hang on one second, let me just finish that in there. Just because I think it's important that it goes with this right here. I thought I had it big enough for me to see. But if you are a wine drinker, this is not a sweet wine, but it's a very mild red wine. If you love red wines, and I feel like it just goes really really well with this particular this book. Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry here, guys. We're here. Okay. I'll post this afterwards just so we can stay within the timeline because I know I don't want to keep Rhonda for too long because I know she is busy, busy, busy. But I'll give you the synopsis of the wine. I'll put it in the chat. But I wanted to go move forward. I wanted to talk about the sisters' issues, Mariah and Sabrina.
Mm.
Uh, their issues were stemmed from like a childhood thing. Now, you could have done any other type of issue between the sisters. They didn't really, because I thought maybe you were going to do something that kind of tied into what Tabitha had went through, but you didn't. You chose something else. And so, first of all, I want to ask: was this the first choice of the conflict that you wanted between those sisters?
Absolutely. Actually, I felt like, first of all, without spoiling it,
Hmm.
there is, there, one of the issues in this book, that one of the social issues in this book that I address is the um, the black the black maternal mortality rate,
Okay.
which is a health crisis in this country.
Okay.
If you've been paying it, there's not enough press about it, but there has been some. And so that is a deeply personal issue for me. My maternal grandmother died in childbirth um, when my
Mm,
mother was 2 years old. And so I felt, I've always known that. I've always thought about that, and thought about how difficult that had to be for my mom and her siblings. And while this is certainly not their story, I think having moved to South Carolina to do some, initially to do some caregiving with my mom, and now, I'm doing a little bit more of that. We spend a lot of time together, and we talk about a lot of things that we never talked about before. And so there have been times when my mother has kind of shared a lot more about her childhood, and I could see how deeply, even at, I mean, because my mom's 78 now, how deeply hurt she still is about never having had that mother relationship. And I felt like it was time to honor my the grandmother that I never knew, and the mother that my mother never really knew, with a story. And so it became very easy to, there was never another issue
okay.
for these
For the two
sisters.
sisters. Okay.
Um, it I sort of started with the issue, and the characters folded in around it.
Okay. Okay. And their issues was, again, like I said, I love a good unique family dynamic, and theirs was without giving anything away. You really kind of need to read the book because I don't want to state the issues because they make the story.
Yeah,
But Tabitha had a tumultuous childhood as well,
she
and
did.
but I think at the cusp of everything, when we're going through the things that we go through, we think we're doing the best that we can, and sometimes communication can be it can solve a lot of problems just by telling people how you feel, and then but we don't know how to do that. There was a
Right.
lot of with these women, both in Tabitha in her world, and in Mariah and Sabrina's world. There was a lot of guilt because they felt like they had failed. Sometimes families put a lot of pressure on the people to do well, or you feel like you can't let someone down, you can't disappoint them. And I think in Tabitha's world, um she just kept going down that road because she felt like she had disappointed her mom, her family. So she went off on her own. Now she did make the best of what she had, and she did do very well. And I think those stories that or those letters that she wrote were just a perfect insertion in there for, Sabrina and Mariah, because they again had kind of fell off their boats in their lives. They're doing it, and then something happens, and then they're knocked off their square. And so, like most kind of small time stories too, you go to live in the big city because you don't want to stay in the small towns, because you want to live that life. But when you are wounded in that life, then
Yeah.
you come back to that small town. And the grandmother too. Grandmothers are, oh my gosh, where would this world be without grandmothers, right?
I don't.
Uh, because the grandmother, and I wanted to ask you too. So when the grandmother made those text messages, right? I said to myself, oh, the grandmother is saying enough is enough with this stuff, you know. And I think with the traumatic thing that had happened with the grandmother and the grandfather, life is short. I think everybody is feeling like life is short, and we got to get this together, because Tabitha wouldn't want us to, be falling by the wayside. So when you wrote those things, how much, when you were reading, because it was traumatic for them, it was traumatic for everybody, they all had their stories. What was it like for you to write that, and what was your emotions like when you were writing those stories, because you had to shift from
Mhm.
Tabitha to Mariah to Sabrina, they all had these issues. What was your emotions like when you had to write these things?
It wasn't easy. It was hard. Particularly, I think that I didn't know what, therapy on the page was going to look like. I knew
Mhm.
that I wanted to do it, but I didn't know how effectively I could do it. So when it got to the time, the chapters where, Mariah, and I want people to know there's a therapy rep in this book. I think, like,
Mhm.
that's a really important thing to not to be spoilerish about, because I think that people are looking for that. Mental health, healing, wellness, those are the most popular hashtags trending, right now. And so people are looking for healing and looking for help and trying to keep their mental health together. I think the pandemic really threw us off our axis. And so I
Yeah.
want that to be known. But thinking about doing that and putting it on the page, like, how effective would I be able to do it? And so it really, those chapters were hard, like,
Mhm.
emotionally difficult. Even the chapters where, Mariah and Sabrina, really came to a head in their, some of their fights. They didn't have a lot, but the ones they had were really tense. And me and my sister, we don't fight, so I didn't even have that experience, because my mother wouldn't let us. I didn't
Yes.
I didn't have that excuse. Like, we used to try to get mad at each other, pull that Brady Bunch stuff when we was kids, and she was like, "Oh no, ain't no slamming doors and being, y'all are talking to each other. So sit here at the table till you talk." And so she forced us to manage conflict in that way, which so I had to write something that was, the opposite. And I've done that before. You're a creative writer. It's a part of the process of writing, stretching yourself, and doing what you do. But it was hard. It was hard writing a lot of Tabitha scenes, even though Tabitha has, a lot of really high moments and joy. But, some of her interactions with Sam, and, we incorporate aspects of the Spanish flu, because I wanted to, really bring the history in an accurate
Yeah.
way. And that stuff was hard. Even the research was hard, because you find
Yeah.
out, like, how difficult it was for people at the time, and how much more difficult, like, the Spanish flu was for us, because we were considered to be second class citizens. So we had less resources, less of the medicine, less of the hospital space. When you think about, you know, and this is happening still today, first fired, last hired, with jobs, like, on the
Mhm.
jobs. And, when the farms were desolate during the boll weevil, that affected us much worse. The Great Depression was the Greater Depression for us.
Mhm.
And so there were lots of difficult places, but I leaned so heavy into getting it right and making sure that my readers, like you said, I'm a writer who likes to tap into the emotions of my readers. I write a very interior story. I always have. I think that's my brand. And so I work it till I work it, and I go through what I go through emotionally. Um, a lot of times I don't know what's going to happen. You know, even though I'm an outliner, I outline to a certain point, but those pivotal moments, those are not a part of my outline. I just let that flow. That just happens. It shows up for me. So I feel it on the page in the
Mhm.
same way that you do. Like the first time you experience, I experience it the same way. And I walk away and go, wow, that was a lot. That
Right,
was
right.
good. You know, so yeah. So I
Now
get
have
to
you
hear my stories too.
now have you since you've published the book, have you gone back and reread your story?
I have. Let me tell you what I've done. When the
Okay.
book came out, a week before the book came out, and let me just tell you, I'm good on time. I've had a cancellation.
Okay, good,
When the week before the book came out, I couldn't wait anymore. I reached out to my publisher and I said, "Listen, because
good.
I am an audiobook girly. I love audiobooks. I've been listening to them since the late '90s." And I said, "I can't wait a week to listen to this audiobook. Y'all gonna have to send me a code or something, right?" So they sent me the audiobook and they sent me samples and I started listening to it. And I felt like, first of all, I have three narrators, which is a gift.
Yes, yes.
It really is. I mean, when they told me they told me who I had, I was like, oh my gosh, like y'all love me for real. And so when I listened to the audiobook, and which is beautifully done, beautifully done. I feel like these three narrators were like, oh, okay, so you got two other chicks on this. I'm going to do the best job. Like they were competing for, they are such beautiful, powerful actresses. And they brought their A game and I
Yes.
fell in love with it. And the thing about it is, there are a lot of authors who don't listen to their audiobooks. They don't listen to them because it can feel weird to listen to your audiobook because the cadence of characters' words and the way they say things is different in your head than what comes out in an audiobook production. I had my first audiobook with The Thing About Home last year, and I remember being super excited about that book. And when I got the audiobook, I remember listening to like the first chapter and feeling really strange and hating it and thinking, oh my gosh, this is not what I thought it was going to be like. I'm not happy.
Mm.
And leaving it alone and coming back to it after thinking and kind of even just praying about it, like, why is this so weird for me? I love audiobooks. And I realized, like, Rhonda, this is a different medium. This is the narrator's art, and you have to allow it to be her art. And so once I did that, I was good. I loved the audiobook. So I was ready for this one. And so I've listened to it twice. I listened to it actually, I was in Atlanta doing some book signings this past weekend. And on the way back from Augusta, I put my audiobook in. I wanted to listen to the end again, like the last like 5 or 6 chapters. When I say I was in the car boo-hooing, I was like, I'm crying and this is my book. I wrote these words. It was so powerful. So the answer is yes.
Yeah. You know, I was surprised that you had three narrators in there, but I love the raspiness of the voices because it brought me back to like back in the day. You know what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
yeah, so that was cool. So I got the audiobook too. Usually when I fall in love with something, I usually just get it on all
All the
platforms.
formats, right?
Yeah.
Thank you so
So
much. I'm the same
yeah, so
way.
I had a chance to read it because I read it early and I knew we were going to talk. So I said, I don't have time to hold this book in my hand, this Kindle. So I'm going to listen to the audio. So it was good. Um, Now, Loretta, I left this up here because when you went to talk about the two girls, you talk about therapy because I wanted to kind of hit on that too. And COVID, I think, we've always had mental health, but people didn't talk about it, especially, our people didn't talk about it. But I think it was so overwhelming when COVID came out that it just spilled out. So you couldn't hide it anymore. So we knew we had a problem here. But you did. I agree with Loretta where you say the phenomenal choice of words where you said, therapy on the page. And I also agree that for a lot of us, even during COVID, books were our therapy and still is. For the most time, we pick up. We don't want to necessarily always be engaged in the issues that we're having. Sometimes we get sick and tired of being sick and tired. But when you pick up a book that has an issue, sometimes it gives you the inspiration to, hey, get up off and do something different, or just reading about somebody else's issues will help you, or forget about your own. So I do think that this story is great. You do touch a little bit on therapy, which the character who is experiencing this fights it along the way, which we oftentimes do because we don't want to ask for help. But we see that once, she accepts it, you see that her whole world is so totally different and she's just a different person. And then everybody can begin to heal. You know what I'm saying? So perfect for that. And then Loretta says, thank you for writing such a masterpiece, which I agree. I
Thank
do
you.
agree.
Thank you.
So okay, so we've talked about the sisters, we talked about a little bit about the romance, but the romance is not really the forefront of this book, but it's sprinkled in there. But let's talk about this culture, this gully geechee culture here.
Mhm.
um because it's a whole world in itself, but let's just talk about the food. So you decided to put this particular culture in there. Does that mean, is that something that hits home with you?
I mean, I do have, relatives that are married to people who are Gullah, which makes them Gullah.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't write about the Low Country without including the Gullah. They are the Low Country.
Mm-hmm.
They their food, their cooking is soul food. That's what soul food is. And so we call it soul food, and some people call it low country food, and people, try to get further away from what it is and call it southern food. You call it all the things, but it began with those people on the island who bought the influences of food, were able to maintain their culture from West Africa because of the way the rice plantations were set up. The
Mm-hmm.
rice plantations were, again, back to it. It was so hot that the planters and their families did not live near the rice plantations. They lived inland in Charleston and different
Wow.
places because there was so much malaria. There were bugs. It was awful. And so they couldn't live there. And so because of that, the only people that were there were the enslaved and the overseers.
Mm-hmm.
And so because of that, they were able to maintain their language, their culture. They were able to eat what they wanted to eat. They were able to maintain a lot of things, their music, their religion, things that they wanted, whatever they wanted to maintain, they were able to maintain because they didn't have the same type of oversight that you had on other plantations. And so these people have maintained all these things for hundreds of years. Still,
Mm-hmm.
we have Gullah festivals. There's a lot of Gullah activity in the Low Country. Um, just festival after festival after festival, food trucks and just all kinds of stuff. And so all I got to do is jump in the car and drive over and go and, be immersed in it. And so we have a Gullah museum, which I visited twice and was spent 5 hours one day with the owner of the Gullah Museum in Georgetown. And just with him sharing so much, and they're such sharing, warm people. Like they want
Mm-hmm.
you to know about their culture. They want you to know about who they are. And so being that open, I just feel like, like I said, other people are writing about the Low Country, and they may mention the Gullah. They may mention seeing a woman weaving a basket or whatever on the side of the road, but they don't talk about the Gullah. They don't bring the influences of the Gullah into the story, the language. And I felt like, as a Black author, if I'm going to write in the Low Country, like, you can't not write the Gullah. Because if you do, you're
Yeah.
doing them a disservice. You're doing your readers a disservice. You ain't doing your research. You playing. Like you have to.
And what better way to talk about a culture than the food? Because the food is the heart of everything. You know what I'm saying? So,
Yeah.
the culture. And then JB had said earlier, she made a comment about the rice before you were talking about the rice there. So so Sabrina, her specialty was just like Tabitha, her specialty was these soups. But then when they were brought to the restaurant to open it up to kind of keep it going while the grandfather heals or whatever, she said she couldn't do Gullah. And I thought, well, you almost there. You got these soups, how hard could it be? You know what I mean? So and then we meet Dante, guys. I'm gonna put that is Dante. Let me just say Dante, and then we're gonna
Chef
put that on hold,
Dante.
but we're gonna come back to Dante.
We have a very sexy chef, ladies. It's just
Yes, yes. So
just very
we
much
can't
so.
we can't leave the show without a little bit talking about Dante. But anyway, so I thought, my goodness, she is almost there. Why is she so nervous about this? She's been doing this. I mean, it had to, had to come from somewhere because she was really good at this. But then Dante sets her straight. But then even with the Gully, the Geechee language too is I love to kind of hear them talk,
Yeah, me too.
because but they talk really fast, guys. When they talk really fast, so you might not be able to understand them unless you spend a little bit of time with them and kind of get your palate to hear correctly. You know what I mean? But I love their language, and they were just people who um were again were overlooked. um they were thought of as less than, but then they are these powerful people, and you don't know that until you take the time to spend some time with one of them. Eating
Mhm.
usually brings it out, when you're eating at a
Yeah,
restaurant or whatever,
absolutely.
so people share. So how much time did you spend with this? Because you kind of got it right. I mean, you didn't put a whole lot of it in the book, but you had to have spent some time with it because you did get it right.
Yeah, I mean a lot, and I have worked with a consultant to make sure that the language was, accurate.
Hmm.
Um, and did that the same thing with the thing about home, because I had a little of I introduced it in the
Yeah.
first book, the thing about home. So, but I spent a lot of time with Mr. Rodriguez, the man who owns the Gullah Museum in Georgetown, and then with my cousin's husband. It's it was important to me, and so, it was it can be a little intimidating. I'm one of these people that's, look, all, I think that sometimes, well, I'm not going to say that because it's almost a criticism, but, culturally, we're different from the Gullah, right? Or I am. Culturally, we're different from the Gullah. And so there are Gullah people that probably want to tell their stories.
Hmm.
The same way you have white people writing black people's stories, and we look and
Yeah.
go, well, wait a minute, it's a black woman that wanted to tell that story. You know what I mean? We can't then do that. Like, I know people are writing stories that are with African characters and saying things like, I need an African name for a girl. And I'm like, what is that? What does that mean? An African name for a girl? There's 54 countries over there. You sound crazy. So there's no African name for a girl. What country in Africa, And so
Yeah.
we make those mistakes too. And
Hmm.
so I wanted to be respectful and not like decide, oh, I'm going to tell a Gullah story, because I'm not Gullah. And there's somebody Gullah who wants to do that. But I can't write the Low Country without incorporating it, so I can honor it by making sure I've got really strong representation of the Gullah in the book, and making sure that I have a sensitivity reader, and I do all the things that I
Yeah.
need to do to make it accurate. Because, like I said, you can't write the Low Country without, and certainly not Black in the Low Country without including the Gullah. So, so respectfully, um, I very respectfully and with a lot of sensitivity, I approached it, and I worked hard to make sure that it was right, and made the investments in whatever I had to do in terms of a consultant to make sure that it was right.
Hmm.
Even with my cousin's husband, because it's like you have to be careful, because sometimes you can have a resource and you think your resource is 100% accurate, and he would be. I mean, he grew up in Plantersville, so he is Gullah. I mean, he's always lived in Plantersville, but sometimes you can't take one example and go with that. Like,
Hmm.
you got to make sure that you to get it right. Sometimes you got to kind of use multiple resources. I'm a believer in using multiple resources. It's the same thing if you're writing history. You never use one source for your whatever historical. You've got to have multiple sources to make sure that you have it right. And so I did the same thing with incorporating the Gullah language. You know, yeah.
Yeah, and I would think too with you in, like you said, multiple sources, but even with your cousin, there were generations before him that had a
Exactly.
different story that when he had too. So I appreciate you, taking the time to realize that and putting that in there.
Yeah, because we
Um,
had Miss Libby. We had Miss Libby. She was, from a different time frame.
yeah,
So yeah, I
yes.
enjoyed that character, by the way.
Now let me ask you this. So I meant to ask you this earlier in there. So the book, A Thing About Home. Sometimes I think when we talk about these two books, because one, they were written together. So now there's some overlap into this, like some characters. But would you say, as the author of these books, would you say for a reader we should read both of them to understand? I know they're standalones, but would you
No,
say
I
that?
don't have any overlap. None of the characters are the same.
Oh, not well. Okay, so one of the characters in there was Nigel. So
Nigel was in the thing about home, but he
yeah,
wasn't in Bitter and Sweet.
no, he
None of
wasn't.
the characters. None of the characters are the same.
Okay, so you don't, they're just two different stories. Okay, because we often to say when Bitter and Sweet came out, we thought about, well, should we be reading this one? Do
Yeah,
they
I'm getting that
overlap or
question a
anything?
lot.
Okay, so
Yeah,
they're just two separately great stories
yeah.
that
And you
you
know what's
should
funny
be reading.
is, but let me tell you what's funny that you mentioned that. When I originally turned in Bitter and Sweet, it was a story that was very closely tied to the thing about home. And the thing about home, Odessa and Elijah Black had 8 children, 7 that were living that they knew about. And so what I was going to do was I was going to pull another one of their children, and that was going to be the historical character. Her name was originally Fina. The cook was Fina, and
Hmm.
she was one of their children. And so my plan was I was going to have this series, and each book that I wrote was going to be about one of their children in the historical story and their great grandchildren in the contemporary story. And I turned the book in that way to my publisher, my editor. And after
Okay.
a month of thinking about it while it was sitting on her desk or her waiting to get to it, I started thinking, this is a bad idea. There are going to be people that are going to be like, oh, it's a series. Well, I got to read the, you know how people are. No,
Yeah.
I got to read the first book first. And I was like, that is going to affect my sales for Bitter and Sweet. And so I
Mhm.
asked at a meeting with my editor and my agent, I said, we have to talk. I'm sorry. I know, like, I had this deadline. I turned the book in, and now I'm having all these second thoughts about it being a sequel. And I don't want series sequel fall off, which is like a 25% decrease automatically in your sales. I
Oh
can't have
wow.
that. I'm a Black author with a new publisher. Like, their standards for me are high. You know what I'm saying? Like, girl,
Yeah,
you can't have
yeah.
their sales falling off. They need to be growing. And so I took the book back from my editor and created a new family. And that's how Tabitha and the Hollands were born. They were originally the
Oh,
Black family.
okay. Okay, interesting.
Yeah,
Interesting.
interesting, right?
Okay, so she would
But
have
none
been
of
if
the
you would.
characters are the same.
Okay. Well, that sums it up. That clears it up, I should say. But
Yeah.
you were saying that originally the person in A Thing About Home was going to be Tabitha in The Bitter and Sweet.
She was gonna, yeah.
Okay.
Alfina was one of the children in the historical characters' children. The one of their daughters. She was Alf. Her name was Alfina in the thing about home, and so she was Alfina in Bitter and Sweet. And then I changed her name to I changed all the characters. So then I came up with Tabitha, and I really liked Tabitha, because Bitter is a short version of Tabitha. And so I bitter, I do stuff like that, right? So that's how
Yeah.
I came up with her name. I wanted something that went with either sweet or bitter, and I was like, oh, bitter,
Yeah.
Tabitha.
Yeah. And we've talked about all of the good things that it was in there, but let's talk about because this book touches on the Jim Crow eras as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so with Tabitha, with Charles, let me say Tabitha's father,
Yeah.
Charles,
Mm-hmm.
when you first start out reading him, you want to not like him. But when you get to the part almost to the end of the story, when you kind of understand what Charles was, you kind of say, no, this man made a lot of sacrifices.
There are
Um,
secrets and there are
yeah.
sacrifices, and our people don't always tell the secrets. Like we some secretive
Yes.
people, and so and I know. I mean, that's just I've heard it over and over again with in book club meetings, where I've talked to readers, at the time about the thing about home, and so and had my first meeting with a book club on Friday night about bitter and sweet, and so we our ancestors are the best at keeping a secret, honey, and
Yeah.
so
They take
especially
them
if
to
they
the
take you home.
grave
Child, they
too.
will
They
take
take
you to the grave, to the grave, to the grave. And so, and it was a secret that had to be kept, some secrets don't always have to be kept, but there's some secrets that are life and death. And this was kind of a life and death type of secret that if it got out, it could destroy, it could hurt a lot of people.
yeah.
And so, and what's funny is I didn't know what the secret was until I wrote it.
Oh,
And so,
I'm gonna
when I
say,
wrote it, I said, "Oh my gosh, this is so interesting."
I didn't know. I'm going to tell you, I didn't know the secret until I read it. Let me just say that,
Yeah,
because I knew it was
yeah.
something with him, but I did not. In my wildest dreams, I was so caught up in Tabitha and, like, ooh, girl, don't do that. Oh my gosh, don't do that. And, oh, why is he like that? I just couldn't completely
Yeah,
tried to figure
yeah.
out the reason for everything. It's always a reason for something. So,
Always a reason for everything.
yeah.
And I think that's a lot of why Tabitha felt like she couldn't go back home. Aside from just wanting to carve out her own way, she didn't always feel like she was wanted.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so because she heard a conversation as a very young child, and that happens to a lot of people. You
Oh,
overhear
yeah.
some grown folks say, and and you take it to heart. And so she struggled with believing that she really had a place. And so she was kind of the black sheep of the family. And how many of us know when the wolf comes, the black sheep is the easiest one for them to pull away, because the black
Mhm.
sheep stands out. And so that's why it made it easy for even Joseph to sort of lure her away from her family, and for her to
Yeah.
and she was very young on top of that,
Yeah. Yeah.
for him to lure her away, because she didn't always feel protected, or that she had a father. She really felt like a burden. She felt
Yeah.
like a burden. And
Yeah.
so when you feel like a burden, and then but you love people, and you have an opportunity to unburden them, you do. And so she felt like her, even not coming back, and there was a lot of shame in this book. You talk about the guilt, but there was
Mhm.
shame. All three of these women carried shame,
Yes. Yes.
so it was like a generational curse. And
Yes.
there's a line that Miss Libby says in the book. She says that the devil uses shame,
Yeah. I
because
got
it's
that highlighted.
isolating. It's isolating. And so we have to be careful not to allow shame to keep us away from our purpose and our destiny and our loved ones.
Yes. I have that highlighted. Yeah, the devil likes to use shame. He uses it because we allow him to, and that's true in everybody's life at some point. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? We don't just everything is like all, roses, cookies and roses. I mean, we do things we don't feel like we're being our best. Sometimes even at work, I kind of struggle sometimes, I think we call it the imposter syndrome. Sometimes
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
you feel like you're just not good enough, or you shouldn't be in this spot in this spot. But yeah, I though, and that's what I said. This book is so relatable because you got all of this stuff flowing through this book. It's a well written book, and it just fit. But you gut punch us with some of the stuff, like the therapy, like growing up as a child. And as children, we're always ear hustling because that's just what we do. But sometimes we don't always catch the beginning or the end, and so we don't know. We just hear what we hear, and then we just tap out and we take that and we run with it. And that's not always the case. But I wanted to say, and I can't say this now, or I don't know if you can answer this without it being a spoiler. But Joseph, how,
Mm.
what was his deal? I kind of I wanted to ask you this, and maybe I may have to ask you this when we have this real book discussion, because Joseph kind of I didn't quite understand him too, so he was somewhat of a mystery to me too, because I couldn't quite put him in the friend or foe category. You know, he was sort of
You
right.
know, Joseph was, was like Joseph was like some men are today, yesterday, from the beginning of the time. They want what they want, and they greedy. And he, I think, was a man that of high social standing, and he was probably assigned a wife, and maybe didn't had more of an attraction to something else. And so I'm gonna leave it at that.
Yeah, yes,
What
it,
does that,
because
and what does that make? And does that make him a bad guy? Absolutely, he was a bad guy.
yeah,
He was, because he was a liar and a thief, and he was so he was definitely a bad. I think he was definitely going to be the dark horse in the story. In my opinion, did he love Tabitha? I think he probably did. Absolutely. He was, because he didn't disappear on her, but he was wrong because he was married, and he knew he took this kid, and he lied to her and pulled her away from her family and then threw it in her face.
yeah,
Like, when you came, So, yeah, I think that he probably was. There are a lot of people in that financial or in that income sort of bracket, that class structure, that they have, like his mother said, Joseph knew the type of woman he was supposed to marry. And I'm sure he did that. Was
yeah,
that who he wanted to be with? Probably not.
yeah.
Because
And I also,
she and Tabitha were complete opposites.
yes, they
She was
were.
tiny. She was tiny. And as the book said, Tabitha said that, this woman, this little slip of a woman walked in as white as cotton, and so, and she was very dark. And so, but maybe that was his preference, but he just couldn't marry that because, the paper bag test.
Right. Yeah, and Tabitha had some things going on that she felt like, even though people were telling her how beautiful she is, because to me, different is beautiful,
Yeah.
no matter how you slice it. But she was tall, more tall than women, and then back then you had to be petite, and you had to be just so, so glamorous, so like a girly girl. But she was tall and she was dark, and she was different. She was a little bit different from her family because they were not, they were dark, but I mean they were brown skinned, but they weren't dark. And Tabitha,
they were, her family could pass for white.
yeah,
All of her family could pass for white. And
yeah,
so she was real different from her mom,
yeah,
from mama and papa and her siblings.
right. And then the conversation that she heard her mom and her mom having with her dad, um it just stands to reason why she would feel the way she would. I mean, she was already feeling some kind of way, but then hearing that, that broke her heart, and it broke her spirit. And that was why this lion was able to come and lure her away, and left her in the lion's den.
Yes.
So yeah, perfect. So again, Rhonda, thank you so much for writing this story. Now, are we going to get let's talk about Dante. Can't leave Dante there. So Dante was this sexy uh gully chef. Now, let's just say sexy, and then this language that he speaks. Ugh, come on now. And then he
Yes.
cooks. Okay, so honey, he was already
Girl, he was the trifecta.
So now, will we see more of Dante? Or are you going to explore any of this story moving forward, or is this your one and done with these characters?
Well, I don't know. I think it's one. I think that the next book that I'm proposing is another Low Country story. It's actually in Beaufort County, so I'm moving from Georgetown to the other side of Charleston. But I am writing a short story. I'm behind on it. I was supposed to get it to readers at the end of this week. So people that had pre-ordered my Bitter and Sweet, one of their pre-order gifts was they were going to get a story that was going to combine the characters in both these books. And so, yes, people would see, and certainly I'll share that with you. People would see Dante again in this little short called Low Country Love. Whether or not you know, readers see there's this thing that becomes dangerous when you bring characters into other stories, even if it's just for a cameo, and it
Mm-hmm.
really stands on its own. Somebody says, "Oh, he was in that book. It's a sequel." And it's not a sequel in any way,
Oh,
shape, or
yeah.
form. And again, it becomes dangerous. And so it makes it really hard to bring characters. I know some writers that do it. They do. Unoma on Wancourt does a great job of incorporating cameo appearances from other books into her romance stories, and I think you can do that with romance. You certainly can do it when you're an indie author, because you can do whatever you want when you're an indie author. But
Mm-hmm.
when you are in a relationship with HarperCollins, like they definitely, like I said, they don't want to see series fall off any more than you do, and so you know, they kind of tend to stay away from that until I think once I have a larger women's fiction readership,
Mm-hmm.
which is growing quickly. You get to a stage where you can kind of do what you want. I don't think I'm there yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
And let's talk about your writing journey just a tad bit, because you are kind of considered a hybrid, because you do have some indie written books, and then of course this is traditionally published. So what is it like for you to have to switch between the two? Is it difficult, or which one do you like better, or you're just kind of in between?
You know, I started off traditionally published. My career, that's how I started my writing career. My first three books were published with Kensington under Carl
Mhm.
Weber's imprint, Urban Christian. And when that imprint went away in 20, I think 13, I decided to write my first romance. I was writing kind of more serious relationship fiction for that imprint. And so I decided to write a romance because I loved romance. And so I wrote
Mhm.
22 romances before I came up with the idea for the thing about home. And so, and I loved it. Loved it. Loved being indie published, loved setting my own schedule, writing the stories I wanted to write. Marketing could be tricky
Yeah.
because, you know, when you're indie published and fortunately for me, I brought a lot of readers with me. Okay. So I did not have to build my readership from the
Oh,
ground up.
yeah.
Um, and so and I write full time, like this is all I do. And so I wrote a series that just sold and sold for me during the pandemic. And so I but the algorithm shifts, you know, on social media, you know,
Yeah.
really
Ugh.
affect indie author money
Yeah.
because you one day you're running ads and they running high, you're selling, the next day you go, why haven't I sold any books? And you look, and there's been a shift in the algorithm. And so that was becoming problematic for me. So when I came up with the idea for the thing about home, it was 2020. You know, we were in the middle of the pandemic. I was not actually writing. I was doing a lot of editing because I've done some freelance editing work. And so I got this idea and I thought, I wanted this book. George Floyd had been murdered. Of course, prior to that, we had had a series of televised murders, you know, and I
Yeah.
wanted to write a book that would just be a hug and a kiss for Black women. And that's so when I thought that, I immediately came up with this idea for the thing about home. And I was like, oh my gosh, like this is a warm feel. This is the hug and the kiss that I want. But I felt like it needed a larger platform. I didn't want it
Mhm.
to just be a hug and a kiss for the people on my mailing list, you know, or the people that I
Yeah.
had access to. So it was the first time in, I don't know, 7, 8, 9 years that I desired to be traditionally published again. And so
Oh,
I
good.
went to a writers conference, pitched it to the editor at Thomas Nelson. She immediately was like, yeah, I want to see that. And I was like, are you sure? Because I didn't put on his shirt. And I am going, and Thomas Nelson didn't traditionally publish I mean, they have very few Black authors that they've had on that imprint. And when I say very few, I mean two. And so I'm like, y'all don't publish Black fiction. And so this is going to be a Blackly Black book. And so if we can't come to an understanding that it's going to be very, very Black, Nigel ain't putting on his shirt, Casey is going to be drunk, then we don't have a deal. I need a publisher that, you know what I mean?
Right,
And
right. Yeah,
and
yeah,
because these are deal breakers. Like this is
yeah.
not going to become something that we get into editorial. And then all of a sudden you're trying to have these conversations with me about
Right,
it.
right,
Up
right.
front, she's getting drunk. He ain't gonna take off his shirt. His shirt gonna stay off, and it's gonna be super black, blackly black, 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 all the
Kudos
black.
for you. Kudos
And
for
so
you.
my editor was amazing. She was like, write what you want to write. I want the story of your heart. And so so being traditionally published has been a real gift. I got to go to Essence last year. This coming Saturday, I'm going to be on stage speaking at the American Library Association
Oh,
conference about
wow.
writing complicated female characters in women's fiction, like by myself on stage for an hour. It's a little intimidating,
Wow.
but I would not have those opportunities if it wasn't for HarperCollins. So the traditional, because airfare, hotel, and
Yeah.
some of these events are gatekept, you know, and so
Mm-hmm.
the gatekeepers have
Mm-hmm.
the in, and so there are advantages and disadvantages to both. Right now, I'm enjoying being traditionally published. I like having the support. I went to the Go On Girls event, which I've always wanted to. Every Black author is so funny because Dolan Perkins was the featured author there, and she said, "I've always wanted to be in the book choice for Go On Girls." It's like every author, every Black author on the planet does, and it was so funny to hear her say that because she's so amazing. To know that you have something in common with her. And so I got to go to that event because of my publisher. So that wouldn't have happened for me. Access to 500 book club members and them paying for the hotel. Like there's money. They got money. And so they spend it the way they want to spend it. And, they've been spending a little bit on me, here and there. And so so again, with traditional publishing, there's some things that are, the gatekeepers have the lock and the key. And if you want in, you got to kind of have a book deal, unless something magical and
Yeah.
special happens for you.
Yeah.
Clearly, that can always happen. But so right now in this season, I'm enjoying the relationship that I have with the team at HarperCollins Christian is amazing. I mean, and I'm not saying this because it's recorded. They really are, because I could not just say it. You know what I'm saying? They
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
are. They let me. I've already told you I had input on my title. They give us input on our covers. They don't try to tell you what to change your story. They just really is so collaborative. Like even when they plan events and things they want you to do, it's asking, would you like to do this? Rhonda, would you like to speak at ALA? And then we can ask them for things that they don't think of, like going to Go On Girls, like, can you pay for this hotel? Because it's $400 a night. And then they go, yeah, we'll do that for you, And so a lot of people can't say that about their publishers. I know that because I've had conversations with other authors who have been, that they don't necessarily have a team approach. And so
Mm-hmm.
so right now for this season, I'm really enjoying it, but I'm also have indie projects that I'm going to be releasing over the next year. It's hard to balance both because they're two different audiences in a lot of
Yeah.
respects.
Yeah. Yeah. But I do think that you're right. Authors do have different experiences with, different
Yeah.
publishing companies. So I think I always thought that it was good to have the best of both worlds if you can handle it. But congratulations to you. That is a huge honor. And one of the things I love about anybody being traditional published is that the publishing company allows you to write the story the way you want to write it, because we want to hear your voice. We don't want crafted voices because they think it might not say that.
They don't always do that. A lot of
Yeah,
them don't. A lot of authors
yeah,
are you'll submit a story and you love it, and they're like, we don't want to publish that. And it's the right story. That you would write the heck out of it, and they don't want it because the sales team says, well, I don't know. I don't think I can sell that. And that makes it a done deal.
yeah,
And I know a lot of people's stories in that vein. No, then sales doesn't want it, so it's going to be
yeah,
rejected. And so I really love that I've not experienced that at all. Because even though when they brought me on to write contemporary stories. And now I'm doing dual timeline, and it's okay. It's not like, well, you did that thing with the thing about home, but we're going to need you to shift back over because this is what we wanted. It hasn't been that way. It's been, we love your voice. We, you know, we want to build with you. And so I'm really grateful for that.
Well, I am grateful too that this story came out the way it was, because it was really really well written. Guys, if you have not already got this book, the book is Bitter and Sweet by Rhonda Mcknight. You really 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 need to take some time. It'll be well worth your time in reading this book. It's packed with a bunch of stuff in here. I mean, you can just lean toward whatever you want. You got it in here. Like, again, sister fiction, dual timeline, second chances, romance, therapy, because we all need that. We got a little bit of the Gullah culture there to bring you, a little bit back to the low country setting. I think, like I said, I've written a few authors have written stories about the low country. Didn't know anything about it until people started writing about it. It sounds like a great experience to visit there and just to see the culture. You got grief and loss. There's some things in here on how to deal with that. Me, myself, all of us have had some grief and some loss.
Absolutely.
And then we have some multi-generational things, because again, a lot of times we're the vine. A family is the vine, right? So it starts somewhere and then it just keeps on going. And just like I've been doing a little bit of gardening here, so I'm going to use this analogy.
I love it.
Sometimes you have to cut off a little bit, you have to prune a little bit, because that energy is going, you have that same energy and it's going to try to heal all the way through. But sometimes you have to prune off the bad parts of it so that the good seeds and the good stream can come through. And so I think when the grandmother made the text message, I think that was her pruning, because enough was enough.
Enough was enough.
Now all of the good vines just opened up. It was no more, calcification in the vein. It was just free flowing, and then everybody was able to heal. So I encourage you, from one book buddy to another, get this book, read it. You will not be sorry. And then hurry up and read it, because at some point we're going to try to get Rhonda to come back and have a big old discussion with us so we can get some.
That'd be so much fun.
Yes. So if anybody want to call me, because I've already read the book, and if you just need a book buddy, I am considered a viable book buddy. You can call me up and we can talk about it. So Rhonda, close us out. Tell us a little bit about where to find you, and if you got any upcoming projects as well that you can talk about right now. Give us all the stuff.
So I'm on tour right now. So anybody who's in South Carolina, I'll be in Charlotte tomorrow. Is it tomorrow night? No, Thursday night I'll be in Charlotte, Fayetteville, North Carolina, in a couple of weeks, and several locations in South Carolina, going back to Atlanta in August. So if you're in any of those areas, I'd love to meet you. My schedule is on my website under events. I love social media. So, I love social media most of the time. I really like Instagram. So, but I'm also on Facebook. And so I spend time on Facebook and Instagram, sometimes on TikTok. So but I love hearing from readers. So like after you read the book, I just love, like, today somebody wrote me the most amazing note, in my DM on Facebook. Like those kind of things really encourage all writers. And I know there's some writers that don't necessarily respond to, like stuff like that. For whatever reason, but I'm open to it. Like I like reader feedback, even if somebody's trying to tell me how they think my book needed to end or whatever, because I laugh. I'm like, okay, well, how about you go write a book and you write that in,
Listen, I've been known to sneak a little of those things in there, because I'm a man. I'm a crazy reader, so I know what you mean about that.
I personally really like it, and what I also like about it is I learn about my characters from readers. Mm-hmm. There are things that readers have taught me about my characters that I didn't even see. Potential things that was like, oh, I've never thought of it that way. So I love that. I love that kind of, because I'm here to learn, and I'm always here to stretch myself, because something you could tell me might be something I'm going to do that in the next book or whatever. And so I'm always looking for, any kind of creative energy that I can get from readers. So I'm that gal. So you can write me and tell me what you think. I got people write me and tell me how mad they are at Mariah. Like they going blow by blow. blow by blow. I'm on chapter 23, and if I see in the street, I'm gonna punch you in the face. And I'm just like, y'all, I love it. I live for that. So that's why I spend a good amount of time on social media so that I can interact with readers. And so, but aside from my tour, in terms of what's next for me, I'm at that contract stage. So I'm waiting to get a green light on my next story, which I'm even more excited about. Like, hello.
Okay.
Especially the history that's involved.
All
So
right.
hopefully we're going to be a go with that. And so then I can get that written and get that out. But I'm planning to release a few indie romance projects next year because I have this new series idea that I haven't really talked about. I got to let it roll out a little bit, make sure that I'm going to do it. But yeah, that's kind of it. But for I did want to do a giveaway because you asked me about a giveaway and I forgot to respond to you. So however you want to do it, I can send it. Either the reader can get either an autographed copy of Bitter and Sweet or The Thing About Home, as long as I'm sending it, in the continental US. I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to do international shipping. I've done that before. And
well, honey, listen, see, for y'all that started with us and then did end with y'all missing it. So here we go. Just real quick, I'm going to just run through, who we have here, and let's see who stayed with us. And then, but you have to be here to win. So if you're not here, we're going to ask you if we'll call your name. And you're going to say, I'm here. You're going to type that in the comments so that we know you're here. If you don't, we're going to move on to the next one. How about that? All right. Okay. So I'm going to kind of scroll through here, and you're going to tell me when to stop. And then whoever we land on, that's going to be here. But remember, if we land on your name, you got to type in the comments, I'm here, in order for you to win. Okay. All right. Here we go. I'm scrolling. You tell me when to stop.
Stop.
There we go. Loretta Murray. Hey, Loretta, are you in the audience? I am here if you are in the audience.
She's here. Okay, right. Loretta. So you'll let me know which book you want. I don't know if you've read either one of them.
Okay. So Loretta, if you want to DM me which book you want and send me your give me your address and everything, and I'll get it over to Miss Rhonda. And then, hey, happy reading.
Congratulations.
She wants Bitter and Sweet.
Okay,
thank you. So I'll get her information and send it on to you. Okay. So guys, thank you so much for joining me. I know this is my off day and you guys got to probably go to work in the morning, but I am so grateful that you all decided to hang out with us. This was a wonderful story. I'm so glad you didn't miss it because guys, it's an opportunity to talk to Rhonda about this new book. I'm telling you, go get the book. If you're not haven't read it already, read it. You will not be sorry. I am Mcknight Ace, your host. And you can find me on all social media platforms. That's Facebook, that's Instagram, that's X. I do a little TikTok, but not much. And then definitely on my website and on YouTube. So follow me on YouTube, subscribe to the channel to make sure that you know whenever I go live for any type of interview or chat or just shenanigans, because I'm always all about the shenanigans. Also too, I'm going to be doing a book chat later, so you guys come back or follow me on the Facebook so that you'll know about the book chat, so you can come back with me on Friday, have a little fun. Rhonda, Miss Rhonda, we are watching you. We're going to be looking out for you for when you drop that next book. Thank you. You have written a wonderful story.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me and for, highlighting my book and giving me just an opportunity for the people who follow you to learn about Bitter and Sweet. I appreciate that.
Yeah, no, it is definitely my pleasure. So guys, have a great night. Be safe, be kind to yourself and to others always. Okay, good night for now. Okay. Stay with me for a minute.